So my name is Sarah Caldwell, and I'm originally from Wichita, Kansas. I ended up in New Mexico teaching with a service program after college. So I taught on the Navajo Nation for 3 years in a town called Through, New Mexico, was away for a while at graduate school, and then really wanted to come back to New Mexico to work again. When my husband and I decided to move into Albuquerque, I had heard about NACA, and I felt like, given what I'd experienced before and the fact that I really enjoyed working with Native students, this would be a good fit for me, and I felt really lucky to get a chance to work here. First working as a reading interventionist in middle school, and then as a Native literature teacher at the 7th grade level, and now currently as a reading coach and interventionist at the elementary school. I'd always been an elementary school teacher, and moving to Native literature, I got to sort of use my background in ethnic studies, which had been my focus in college, and bring that into the work I was doing with students at the middle school level. So that was something really new and exciting with me. Really, in elementary school, there were certain limits to the type of content that we could do. So working with middle school here at NACA and Native literature has a lot of opportunity. It's really been exciting. Native literature is our English course here at NACA. So instead of having a traditional English language arts programs, we teach the ELA standards through our Native literature course, but it's really meant to be something powerful and valuable in and of itself. So students study Native literature in grades 6 through 10. They read Native literature texts primarily by Native authors in all those grade levels. And so as a Native literature team, we've had a lot of opportunity to think about why we're doing that, the purpose behind it, and the philosophy through the process of writing a Native literature vision statement, which we do here at NACA in all of the content areas. So in our vision statement, we talk a lot about how the goal is for Native literature to be at the center rather than the periphery. So a lot of times students deal with the first text in sort of a piecemeal way, but here it's meant to be seen as something valuable in and of itself, worthy of deep study over multiple years, and that's kind of the foundation. We want students to be able to see themselves in the text, so by reading texts by Native authors and featuring Native characters, they're able to make connections to their own lives, and we try to choose diverse texts by diverse authors with representing the diversity of Native experiences as well. And then we also want students to begin to see themselves as authors and scholars. So in working with Native authors and talking about Native authors, we want our students to feel that their voices are powerful, see other Native writers whose voices are heard around the world, and to start raising their own voices. So I think that's our underlying philosophy in Native literature. I guess first I want to talk a little bit about my role in teaching Native literature as a non-Native person. So I'm biracial, Anglo, and African American, and there's some contradiction and tension in me teaching a Native literature course. So I feel like one thing that's helpful for me and one way of giving up authority for me as I work as a Native literature teacher is to make sure that I don't take on any sort of expert status in the classroom, but that I'm really there as a facilitator for students to look deeply at these texts and really get a sense of their own power to interpret the text and make meaning from it. So I'm not coming in as an expert saying, well, this is what Sherman Alexie means, or this is what Joy Harjo means. The students are really doing that work, and then I say to them, I'm not the expert here. There are things that I can't really speak and talk about, but here are all these different voices, and let's see what meaning you can make from it. And I think that's exciting for students. Because I'm not the expert, and then they're doing more of the work as well. So when we start out the year in 7th grade Native literature, we sort of start with students and their identities. We start with a unit founded in the big idea of identity and the essential question of what is identity. And then students ask the question, what are my stories and how do they shape my identity? We're working with the text, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie, which is a wonderful book for students to read. It's exciting. It's a little bit controversial, so it's actually a great way to start the year with 7th graders and engage them. Text choice is one of the challenges in middle school Native literature. There are wonderful texts out there by Native authors, but middle school students are also skeptical about books to a certain extent, so finding ones that they really connect with, that really make them feel that literature is a place for them is challenging. So I felt lucky to work with this particular text because almost without exception, students love the book. In this particular unit, we're working towards a performance assessment called an identity narrative, and students are thinking about a story connected to their own identity, and they're writing that, and as they do, they're trying on a lot of the techniques that Sherman Alexie uses in the novel. They're thinking, they're incorporating dialogue, hyperbole, sarcasm, lists, things that are foundational pieces of his technique. And because the novel itself is so powerful and the writing so powerful, I find that students do some of their most creative and vivid writing at the beginning of the year in the identity narrative task. And another reason I like to start the year with the book and the performance assessment is that it's an opportunity to build relationships through sharing stories. So one way that students get to know me is I model the identity narrative for them. So I do a piece of writing that's usually about my curly hair and the way I've struggled with it and how it's connected to my identity and background. So that kind of makes me a little vulnerable and opens me up. And students also share their work and their writing with their peers and with me. So I feel it's a way of building community within the classroom, and it's also a way for me to build relationship with students that know a little bit about their stories and gives me sort of an insight into their life that I can refer back to when I have conversations with them and as we continue to grow throughout the year. So thinking about identity and beginnings of years and beginnings of relationships, that's the kind of approach I've taken. I talked about the performance assessment from our first unit, and I feel like performance assessment is a big part of our curriculum philosophy here at NACA. So when I first started teaching Native literature and was building the units and thinking about the year, I was trying to, it's challenging to think about what's authentic, where can students have an audience, what's really relevant, and where are they transferring their skills to a novel situation. And I really wanted to do some oral history work with students because that's something I had done in a graduate class at Western New Mexico University. I had done an oral history interview with a woman who had attended boarding school, one of my husband's colleagues, and it was a really powerful experience for me. Currently, NACA is located in the last building of the Albuquerque Indian School, so our building is sort of saturated in history that a lot of times our students don't know about, and those things were all really interesting to me. So one unit I've done with 7th graders looks at historical fiction and first-person accounts that are connected to boarding schools from a particular era. So we work with 2 texts that are set in the 1880s, one at a residential school in Canada, and one, School Days of an Indian Girl by Z. Kala Shah, set at a school in the United States. And the culminating performance assessment for students is oral history work that they do with their families. In doing this, we're trying to do a lot of really rigorous literacy work. So students are reading challenging texts, they're doing comparative work with those 2 texts and writing comparative essays, and then they're collecting their own first-person account from a family member and doing work with telling that story and also thinking about pieces that are significant to them. So there's that literacy work that they're doing, but then they're also thinking about some big questions related to their identity and their trajectory. So one of the essential questions for the unit is whose story does history tell? And so they're thinking through the different accounts they read and through articles, and then in connection to their own historical accounts that they collect, like how are the stories I'm hearing similar? How are they different? How are voices empowered in different stories, and how are they left out? So there's a critical literacy component. And then they're also asking questions that connect to them more personally, like what is the legacy of Native American boarding schools, which is a really hard one for them always. What is legacy again? It's a hard one to grapple with, but we try. And then they're also thinking about what is the significance of this historical experience for me and my educational experience. So I think relevancy is big here at NACA. So in this unit, I really want students to think, how is the specific experience they have here at NACA connected to a whole historical trajectory, and what impact does that understanding have on the way in which students view the opportunities that are offered to them here. So that's the goal. And it's also an opportunity for students to get to know staff members and their own life experiences. We do whole class interviews of different staff members who attended boarding schools, and it's a chance for students to learn more about different schools like Santa Fe Indian School, where several staff members have attended. But it's also a chance just to get to know someone's life in a deep and detailed way, and to get to know the lives of people who serve as role models for them, and to think about sort of life choices and life decisions that these wonderful leaders within our school have made, and to have that as sort of a reference point as they're moving through adolescence and making all of these choices and thinking about who they are and who they want to be as adults. I have a lot of hopes for students that they have positive, happy, productive lives, that they get to be fulfilled and feel fulfilled in the work that they do. I think a hope that I have that is specifically connected to Native Lit is that students feel engaged by reading and writing, that they see value in it by the time they leave NACA, and that they're skilled, critical readers and writers. I think I would like for them to be able to go out and interact with all different sorts of texts and be able to both understand them and criticize them and understand the perspective and points of view from which they're coming from. I think particularly at this moment in our country, that's a huge concern for students across the board. They're bombarded by information, it's overwhelming, a lot of it's inaccurate. And so I'd like for our students to have the confidence and the skill to go out there and interpret information and speak back to it and challenge it when it's not valid.